Welcome everybody today, and thank you, Aniska. And thank you everybody for your patience. I know we had to adjourn this several times. I wanted to get a sizable amount of people in our room and as attendees so we can engage and put out the information. And I appreciate all of you being patient and attending today. I promise Kristin and I will make this as informative and as interesting as possible. I want to thank Kristin Pelatti for joining me today. She's one of our really good AmTrust agents, Assured Abstract, up in Rockland County, and she is the CEO and the General Counsel of Assured Abstract. I want to make sure, because the time that we have to do this today, it is a 1-credit CLE. The materials are all annexed in your package, all the statutes and regulations. Any questions, you can contact me, and it's margaret.ling@amtrustgroup.com. All right, because it might be difficult. And I will say, stay in contact with us, because you'll hear me saying that this is such a these changes and regulations are pretty much new. We instituted them in February and still undergoing a lot of revisions and possibly changes. After you hear us talk about it, you'll see why. We're going to talk about the history of RIN and RON traditional notary. Kristin and I will run through the differences, and then we'll run to the part of what it takes to do a RON. All of us are traditional notaries, but there's all these new requirements and how it is different. And then we're going to throw some hypotheticals back and forth as a learning tool for all of you to try to understand it. I've been going through tons of materials since January on this. And as I said, it pretty much, I would say, is a works in progress. I'm going to make note that I was formerly of the New York State Bar Task Force, which was implemented on an emergency basis back in January to try to put a stop to the Department of State and the governor that lawyers were exempted from all these new requirements that we're going to talk about. There has been no progress on that. I will report, and I will keep everybody engaged to see whether that ever comes to fruition. On that note, let's start talking about it. We kind of, as lawyers, we don't think, oh, I didn't bring my prop. I still have the same notary stamp. I just said to Kristin, in October, I will be celebrating my 40th anniversary at New York Law School. I was a class of 1983. I still have the same notary stamp that I had. It's very small, and several reasons why perhaps I'm going to be continuing to be a traditional notary rather than remote until things get a little bit more experience. The history of online notarization probably came into its commencement when COVID hit us back in March of 2020, and Governor Cuomo issued, a lot of it started under Executive Order 202, which dictated every waking moment of our life. COVID outbreak hit. You had to determine who was an essential business, who wasn't, who had to shut down, who was permitted to continue. There was a really concern back in March of 2020 that that real estate lawyers, we were doing our transactions, what was to happen if we had to do social distancing. It got to the point, weeks into it, we were considered essential business. And Kristin is at Keller Williams, and her mother has several offices, probably remembers what that was like. Could you have an open house? Could you interact physically? And as time transpired, we began to adjust ourselves to social distance and all kinds of remote situations. So in that situation, what do you do with a notary? And under that, Governor Cuomo, under executive order, all right, started using what we call RIN. But before I talk about RIN, let's talk about our notary in general, what it takes to be a notary. We forget from the beginning. Traditional notary, okay? Customarily, this is going to sound familiar to many people on this call today. It's governed under New York Executive Law 130. Customary practice, and I'm used to this 40 years. I'm a notarizing somebody, go to a closing, or meeting the clients before, I got my stamp, and you're physically the person, the signor, and that's what you'll hear me saying, that's the notary and the signer, is physically in front of me, okay? And we're looking at one another in the same space, same time. I ask the notary, will ask the person for their identification, photo on it. Can they identify them? Are they the same person, from the ID to the person sitting in front of us, to avoid fraud? All right, you sign the document in front of me. I'll keep saying this for a reason, okay? The signer does it in front of me, and then the signer signs with a wet signature in front of me, all right? And then the notary completes the statutory acknowledgement, which says that I've done this, and somebody's in my presence, and then I stamp it. I stamp it with a wet signature. The reason why I say this, and we as attorneys, we're very excited when we pass the bar. You all might remember that, to have a notary stamp in New York, it's $60. You have to be a citizen or a legal permanent resident. You have not been convicted of any crimes. You have to be 18 years or over, and you could apply to get a notary. You have to take a test. I have many paralegals over the space of my time were so nervous, and I said, oh, it's like the learner's permit with Department of Motor Vehicles. It seemed like it is, okay? And you got to go take a test. We as attorneys are very excited because we don't have to take the test. Kristin's probably smiling. You get admitted to the bar, and then we can waive in with the proper fees to Department of State to get a real estate broker's license, insurance brokers, and notary. And that's what we've pretty much done. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because while I was on the task force, we take for granted that we notarize documents, okay? And I want to raise this case because it's important. Many times you're under a lot of pressure, either it's because of COVID and social distancing, or people are moving around, to notarize documents. And remember, I said traditional notaries in the presence of the person, you're in front of one another. We're going to talk about the Appellate Division First Department case, and I don't really talk about cases much, but this one is of special significance. I brought it up a lot. That's the grievance committee for the First Department Appellate Division against Tabak. All right. Recent case decided September 23rd, 2001. Everybody talks about this case. This woman, Ellen Tabak, okay, practiced in New York and then practiced in Florida where she lived. She go back and forth. And I'm just going to paraphrase the facts, okay? Her friends are getting a divorce, and the husband goes to her that I really need to sign this divorce agreement. She signed it already, okay? And I need to get this done because it's stressing me financially and emotionally. We need to have this final. We need the judge to sign it in Florida. She then agrees. She says, oh, looks like the wife signed it, and she puts her notary stamp on it, okay? That's bad, number one, that the signer wasn't in front of her. And she, on her defense, was that she felt she wanted to help a friend. So I always bring this up because as lawyers, we have our notary stamps, and many times people have asked me, and the person's not, I won't do it. And what does Margaret say? I'm not jeopardizing my law license. Yes, I have the notary, but the notary might possibly jeopardize your law license. And that's why I'm starting the CLE this way with the lawyers in front of us. So she signs it. We find out her notary stamp expired, but she changes the dates on all the documents. And then she gets deposed into court on this, and she lies and said the woman was in front of her when she notarized it, right? All right, so she already perjured herself there, and then she said after that they realized her stamp had expired, and she said she knew her stamp had expired, and she admitted to making false statements. She put herself in a very big dark hole. Okay. The conclusion of this in Florida is that she was brought up for grievance proceedings and her license was suspended. All right. Pretty much under the rules of professional conduct, just as in New York, ours is 8.3 and 8.4, misconduct and, conduct unbefitting of an attorney. All right. It covers your honesty, trustworthiness, your conduct, that you would not engage in dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. All right. She engaged in all of that by backdating documents, admitting that the person was in front of her, giving false depositions and testimony. So yes, it was in Florida. And I guess the New York Appellate Division got wind of it up here in New York. Okay. And the end of the day, the rule of law and the holding was they used reciprocity and they disbarred her in New York. It's a very harsh case. Okay. But I know so many times people have wanted to change a will or change their mother's 401k, and the mother's in West Palm Beach. And Margaret, could you please notarize her signature? She's not here. I wouldn't do anything like that because you just never know. And basically, this all surfaced because the wife realized what happened. And she's the one that reported this attorney and actually made a remark, I thought you were my friend, to the attorney that got involved. And, she just basically, the attorney kept in the New York defense of her license. And it was one of the attorneys, I won't mention his name, that defended her, that used to be on the grievance committee. She used the fact that she never did this before. It was a single act. and that she's of the utmost character, single mother with children, and she just couldn't take the pain of watching her friends go through their divorce. It wasn't worth losing her license over this. And again, it was 8-3 and 8-4 of the rules of professional conduct, which talk about, dishonesty and deceit. And it's so horrible that you should be cited for that on your license. So that is the matter of Tabak. And I start this off. So as you're notarizing, and that's under traditional, please be mindful of the fact that the person's got to be in front of you. And I tell this to any notary, and I'll proceed to use this with the remote. If you're not comfortable doing it, you'll hear me saying when we get to the electronic notary, step away from it. Particularly, you don't want to be involved in fraud or anything else like that. Okay, so we'll talk about that. So the role of a notary, we're commissioned. You might remember that, but the Secretary of State, right? We apply for it, $60. All right, you must take a test. I said we're waived in if we're attorneys. You may have not thought of this, but you could administer oaths and affirmations, take affidavits and depositions, receive and certify acknowledgments of proof of documents such as deeds, mortgages, power of attorneys, demand acceptance or payment of foreign inlaid bills. This is the power of being a notary. Notaries usually take place in law offices, banks, could be the pharmacy. And as we're talking, you'll realize why CVS or Walgreens, they don't want to do notaries anymore. After I finish talking, Kristin and I start talking about Ron, you'll realize why a lot of people, including the banks, have wanted to walk away from doing remote note. They'll do traditional, but they don't want to do what we call RON, remote online notary. Okay, so during COVID, all right, Governor Cuomo, under the executive law, Executive Order 202.7, and it was extended many, many times until this RIN, Remote Ink Notarization, expired on January 31st, 2023. Again, I'm going to say it, RIN, RIN Notary. If someone's trying to do this with you, the answer is no. It is expired and has now been succeeded by Remote Online Notary. The difference is very clear. Remote Ink Notarization, throughout COVID, we used it. Both the signer and the notary had to be in New York State. Okay, and that's known as RIN. And you literally, like today, we're looking at each other on a screen on our computers. We use our own computers for audio visual technology, use Zoom, Skype, WebEx. All right, and it allows for an interaction, no pre-recording. It was rather cumbersome when we started doing this. It was bad enough during COVID. We were learning how to use Zoom, let alone important documents we were doing. Okay, so basically we would look at your ID. Kristin would hold up her ID. I would look at it and hold up documents that we're doing with wet signatures. And while I'm looking at the document, then step aside and fax it or shoot it on your phone to me so I could see it in front of me as well. I'm seeing it on the screen, and then she's signing it, and then she's sending it to me. And then when it's all said and done, these original documents are all assembled together, all right? And then the notary will receive the originals and do all the proper filings if there's deeds or mortgages, okay? So this was pursuant to Executive Order 202.7. Subsequently, Governor Hochul kept saying, we're gonna do RON next. So RON extends it so the notaries in New York and the signer could be anywhere in the world. I haven't extended it to say what planet they may be on, but I'm sure if Jeff Bezos took off in his capsule, that's a good question. Could you notarize him? All right. So that kept being extended. And we're all sitting here waiting and beta, but when can we do RON? And finally, in January 11, 2022, there was a Senate bill permitting electronic notarization. Okay. And then amendments were coming down, and we all sat tight to see what is Governor Kathy Hochul going to do with it in 2022. And then out of nowhere in January, did we get the directives that RIN expired, we can do RON, a whole battery of new regulations came down. They are in your handout, and we're going to break it down for you, all right? So that's Executive Law 135C. All right, it permits electronic notarial acts. All right, that's important. All right, so under 4A, it authorizes that to be performed. Notary can be done electronically because I've never done one. I only do it physically in front of us. All right, and it sanctions under 4B, which people have to remember. Sometimes technology is not the best. Our cables aren't working. Our our internet's not working. The act must be performed using communications technology satisfying the requirements of the law of New York State, that the document signer is in the presence or in the single place with the notary. So in other words, your technology has to work, and that is in the law. Okay. All right. So part 1 of this executive law 135C talks about RIN. And again, that expired January 31st, 2023. Okay. Part 2 of 135C is where we go with RON. It gave the Secretary of State time to develop the guidelines and the regs for what we call remote online notarization, RON, R-O-N. And then on January 31st, 2023, RIN, R-I-N expired and RON commenced. Okay. All right. So again, the notaries must register. The question is, if you're a traditional notary, all right, to get an electronic notary, you go into the website for Department of State. Okay. You can keep your traditional notary. I still have mine, and I think it's good for 3 more years. I have not applied for it. My colleagues that have said it's a little difficult. It was like getting your COVID booster shot, but it took a couple of hours. They will issue you the electronic notary, and yes, you will get a new number for your traditional. It will not be the same stamp. It'll be totally new. So you can get your traditional and you can get your electronic, okay? So we will go through the steps of what it takes to do this new RON, okay? Where you are in New York, remember, notary in New York State, and the signer could be in anywhere in the world, basically. And you're using communication technology. So not like RIN, where I'm sitting here right now, Kristin's sitting up in Rockland County, probably I'm sitting in Queens, New York. We need to use a third-party vendor who hosts this. That's a third laptop somewhere else that is hosting this event, okay? And I'll get into the specifics, and records the whole event. So this is very different in our electronic world, okay? It's not like it was before. Now, if you're outside of the US, can we do remote online notary if the signer is outside of the United States? The answer is yes, as long as there is a nexus. Remember that word nexus. The notary must verify through verbal confirmation. I'm going to ask Kristin, all right, Kristin, all right, that the record or whatever we're doing, whatever we're signing, is something that relates to a matter before a public official or court or government entity, or it involves property located in the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, or involves a transaction substantially connected with the United States. So if that's the case, there's nexus. So Kristin, I'll be really funny right now. So Kristin is traveling. She's in Paris. She's going to buy her designer handbags, and she wants to buy a pied-à-terre. She says, oh, I like this place in Paris. It's right by the Eiffel Tower. You know, Margaret's in New York. She can notarize. I got to go to a closing, right? So she, remember, she's in Paris and she's buying this beautiful, this has been good at a short. She's buying this beautiful, like, I don't know, 2-bedroom overlooking the Champs-Élysées. All right, all cash, mind you. She needs someone to notarize her signature for this place in Paris. All right. And she said, let's do RON. So she calls me up. I'm not quite sure because I've been reading all these regulations. Kristin, from what I just said, can I do this for you?
No, there's no nexus.
There's no nexus.
You,
I know.
you and my
I
new
know.
flat.
I know. So you're gonna have to go find some nice guy in a red beret, and he'll probably do an apostille or something, because you don't have to go to the consulate. Someone else is gonna have to notarize for you. Okay, so I did that as a learning tool. However, if she wanted to go buy one of those new condos they're building in White Plains that we just talked about, right? Or maybe one of the nice existing condos in the Ritz-Carlton, all right? And she's in Paris, and she calls me. Kristin, could I do that for you?
Yes.
Because we got
The
nexus,
nexus
right?
is
It's something, there you go. It's something in New York. Okay, so let me just see. Official date was January 25th, 2023. RON arrives, okay? And we all had to figure out by reading all of these regulations, and it was effective immediately. So many people contacted us. So I'm just going to make a reference. You've heard me talking in your materials. Executive Law 135C, and this is very important. 19 New York NYCRR Chapter 5, Part 182.2-182.11 of the New York Department of State. All of this is in your materials. One of the most helpful materials for me has been the New York State Department of State frequently asked questions. It's very helpful to run through all of their scenarios. Okay. Now, I didn't even realize this, and Kristen's going to take over the program now. As notaries, all these years of 40 years having notary stamp, we were supposed to be keeping a journal. And I had no clue about that. Because remember, I went and the notary stamp was sent to me. I think I went to Bloomberg's to get it, and I started stamping away. So Chris is going to talk to us about notary journal requirements under section 182.9, both when you're a traditional notary and when you're electronic. What are the requirements? Kristin, you got the floor.
Sure. So as of January 25th of this year, now this is a required practice in New York State. So as a traditional notary, so someone is in person in front of you signing a document and you're notarizing, you need to keep a record of this through a logbook, through a notary journal, and your records have to include some specific items. So the first is the date and approximate time, and the type of notarial acts that you're performing, the name and address of the individuals you're notarizing for, the number and type of notarial services provided, the type of credential that you're using to identify the principal. So whether that be an ID, whether you personally know the individual, if you've confirmed them through two witnesses that have provided IDs, that should be written in your journal. And then the verification procedures that's used for personal appearance. So again, what identification of the individual. So in terms of electronic notarization, you would use the same identification process that you would for traditional, but then there's also there's also a method that a third-party service provider has to do in terms of doing a identification verification. So there's a credential analysis that's done through a database, and then identity proofing.
And then Kristin, will you and I run that back and forth in a little bit, okay?
Sure.
So this way that'll make it easier to talk about it.
Yeah, so the credential analysis should be done through the third-party service provider, and then identity proofing, it's a series of questions that is asked of the individual principal to help validate their identity. So it's a little bit more cumbersome in terms of verifying electronically. And then in addition to the your notary journal log for the electronic notary, you also need to keep the recording of your notarization. That also should be done by the third-party servicer that you're using. And again, that has to be kept for 10 years. So making sure that you're using a service provider that will either keep that in the cloud for 10 years, or you'll have a backup of it somewhere if for some reason that servicer does go out of business, or you're not downloading it right to your computer that crashes.
Right.
So those are what you need in terms of the required logs that we need to keep now as notaries.
And then Kristin, you may not notarize any documents, right, related to any transaction you're involved in or have a financial interest, right? You can't get involved
Right.
in
And
that. You
then
have to get someone else to do that.
yeah, an electronic notarization can't be used for powers of attorneys, wills, trusts,
Yep.
and estates, anything of that nature.
Healthcare proxies,
Healthcare
right?
proxies.
When I get calls
Still
on
need
that,
to go in
can't
front of
do
a
it.
yeah, you still
Mhm.
need to go in front of a traditional notary for those documents.
Exactly. So again, go to the New York State Department of State frequently asked questions that probably bring up these kind of scenarios. to
And
discuss what this is about. Yes.
right. And then one final thing too is
Sure.
when you do electronic notarization for any documents to be recorded, like a deed or a mortgage, you have to paper out through the service provider. So create a certification that electronic notarization has been done.
So we'll run through that as we're running through our hypotheticals. So I'm holding, because when all this happened, everyone called. It could be as simple as using a spiral notebook to keep a record of your journal keeping. There are some fancy books that are on Amazon that you could buy. Haven't gotten to it yet, but we are trying at AmTrust to get those fancy books and maybe share it with our audience. You can get, if anyone wants, there's a template. I believe, I think I see, I'm looking, I think I see Alon on the line that I shared it with him back when I originally did this. I have, if anyone's interested, emailing a template that you could put like an Excel spreadsheet of how to do this, because many times people are carrying their iPad or their laptop with them to keep the journal simultaneously as they're doing the notary. Okay, so this is what this is. I've gotten it from some of the attorneys in the beginning stages of this, so make it easier. But again, it can be as simple as just writing it down in a notebook to do. If
Right.
one
And you
loses
want
their,
to keep those notebooks too, because if you're ever
right,
asked by the
I save
Department of
it.
State to verify whether or not you actually notarized someone's signature, you want to be able to produce that. It's important that we keep them as notaries.
And I'm going just to say, I'm looking in the chat room now that Charles Lesnick, and yes, I was going to mention that area, Charles. I have a lot of friends because of what Yonkers has been through, and thank you, and IDA and the IDA, and unbelievable projects to also buy in Yonkers, not just restrain yourself to one place. So I wanted to big a shout out to Charles Lesniak for that. Okay, so we're talking about Ron. All right, so let's repeat again. When we do Ron, we're doing it because I'm physically in New York. If Kristin was signing it, she could be anywhere in the world. She could be in any state in the United States, but if she's leaving the United States, there has to be nexus. It has to concern a government official or something pertaining to government or some property that is within the jurisdiction of the United States. And if all of that is in place, we can go ahead and do Ron. And again, Executive Law 135C and Regulation Section 182 of what I've attached, okay? And I'm stressing, make sure your electronic ability can hold up, that it's not, that you're not going to have gaps along the way, because that can interfere with the integrity of this entire transaction of notary that's being recorded. Basically, technology is key to this, and you heard Kristin mention third-party vendor. Okay, so that's what I'd said in the beginning that is unique to Ron. It's not like Rin where she and I are just going back and forth showing documents, sending it back. No, there is someone hosting it. You're paying them. Okay, they're overseeing it. They're taping it. All of that is happening. They're verifying ID. All of that is happening. So the question came up in February, who do we use? Who do we use? Okay, and that was the question that came within the New York State Land Title Association. We got beset by all kinds of vendors, and I'm holding here all the letters that I have from Blue Notary, from the desk of Andy Blue. That's his name. He's the president of Blue Notary, that we can do this pursuant to the sections. Okay. All right. Notarized Genie. All right. He's from Florida. All right. One Notary from San Francisco, California. We understand the importance of compliance and the highest standards. Pactima from Austin, Texas. All right. Secured signing. I'll keep going. And I'm just waiting, and many of us are waiting because we don't know much about them. All right. We don't know if they're any good. We have to know that they understand they're not, some of them are not in New York. Do they know the New York compliance issues? So what I'm doing is, if anybody needs it, you can call me at AmTrust, or I'm sure you can call Kristin. We've just been staying in contact with our peers and colleagues to see who's using who and are they any good. Okay. It's better than just blindly going ahead and retaining them to do a Ron, and then you find out that that it's not, that they're not doing it the way it's supposed to be done. All right, so that's the first thing that you have to do, is check out your third-party vendor. Now, I will admit to you that many of us have not applied to do this, or have not even done it. I have not, and I could list a whole battery of colleagues that have said they're just not going to do it. There are people that will do it for you. And again, it's a works in progress to find out which are the recognized. Department of State has not put out a list of recognized vendors. We would hope that they would. Other states have, so you have a greater comfort level in the vendor that you're using. Okay, so more importantly, as I said, is if you have to do it, make sure you go to a reputable third-party vendor, all right, to make sure they know what exactly the rules are. Okay, so Kristin had mentioned, just like traditional notary, you're not going to notarize anything as a notary unless you get identification. So traditional notary, right? What are we usually doing? For a traditional notary, for anyone that physically appears in front of us, we're usually asking for satisfactory identity, okay? In those situations, okay, let's see, let me make sure. Where we know you usually, we'll rely upon your license. We'll look front and back, right? It looks like the person, looks like Margaret Ling, all right? Or if you don't have a license at closings, Kristin's probably very familiar, we'll ask for 2 current documents issued by like a business institution, federal, state government, with at least the person's signature. Costco card, I usually will take, attorney's, security card to get through the metal detectors, right? The third thing we'll take is an attestation by the notary, that's me, that I know Kristin. All right, that would be fine. The fourth thing would be an oath or affirmation of a credible witness who is personally known to the individual and the notary. Somebody that knows Kristin and me. Okay, that would be Vincent of her office. Okay, I could take an affirmation from Vince. Okay, the fifth one is an oath or affirmation of 2 witnesses who know the individual personally. All right, and provide identification. That means 2 people that know Kristin, that are maybe in Keller Williams in her office, and I could take that. Okay, what if I don't
They would
know?
have to provide their identification, right? So you would
Exactly.
take the photo ID.
Yep. And what if I don't know? What if the individual who's coming in the electronic notary window, okay? I don't know them from Adam, okay?
Mhm.
No offense, any Adams in the room, I'm looking through the thing, okay? I don't mean to offend anybody. I would tell you my gut feeling is I probably would not do it, okay? Because again, I stressed in the beginning, my law license is backing up the notary license, okay? If that's the case, and I don't know the person that's approached me, a colleague might call, it's emergency, again, Kristin's now in Rome, she's been traveling, okay? All right, and she saw this beautiful place by the Coliseum. Oh, no Nexus. Okay, well, no, she's bought another, she wants to buy in Yonkers now. Let's please, Charles. Okay, she wants to buy in Yonkers. She's in Rome. Now she wants to buy in Yonkers, and do them a favor. Okay, we always get that word. Do us a favor. All right. I don't know her. All right. I need to do the following. All right. I need any method that I just recited for traditional. Okay. The things I just recited, and this is what she mentioned, credit analysis and identity proofing. And I will review what that is. Kristin and I will run through. All right. So I can go for anything I just said in the beginning as traditional, with an addition of credit analysis and identity proofing. And identity proofing, I will go into it, it's done by a third party vendor. So third-party vendor has a big role in Ron now. Okay. Credit analysis is identification verification. Who is the signer? Remember, all of this is being done before we even decide to do a note, to notarize anything. All of this, I would say, is like due diligence. And I suggest all of this be done beforehand, because as you can see, if we don't make it through the identification process, we waste everyone's time that's sitting in a hosting room. So get this done in advance. All right, who is the signer? Signer Kristin gives me a copy of identification. I look at it front and back. I look at the entire license. Okay. She sends me a selfie of her. So I look at the selfie and I look at her picture. I'm looking at her now that I'm looking at her. All right, to make sure it's the same person, facial recognition. All right. All right. And then the system we use on a legitimate third-party vendor meeting for credential analysis, the system has access to identify her ID that she gave me through governmental agencies. So if it's a driver's license, it would go through New York DMV to make sure it's real. Okay, that's the first level. Okay, then we go to ID proofing. All right, also known as knowledge-based authentication. This is under the Federal Bridge Act, which I kind of laughed when I heard this. And many of us have been through this. I will ask Kristin 5 questions all right? 5 questions she should know, all right? And she has to answer in 2 minutes. So Kristin, I'm not gonna ask you, many of us can't answer these questions. Some of us
Mhm.
can. What was the name of your first dog? Where did you go to school? The name of your first grade teacher? Um, reminds me when I was an immigration attorney, I would go for green card interviews, and couples that were married legitimately couldn't even remember what the both of them ate, what was the color of their toothbrush, where's the light in the bathroom. So you have 2 minutes, and then you have to answer what? How many? 4 out of 5? That's pretty
Mhm.
harsh, right? And then if you don't answer 4 out of 5 and you fail, all right, you get another chance. And then if you don't make it through that, we have to adjourn for 24 hours. Okay. So as I said, better to do all of this preliminary before we even decide to do a RON appointment. Verify all this identification through credit analysis, ID proofing, and the third-party vendor will work with you. That is why it's really important to find the right third-party vendor who has experience and integrity and understands all of this, because there's a lot more than just hosting a notary segment for half an hour. Okay. Let's not forget, before the meeting, we're not wet stamping. Remember, I see that wet signature. We're not doing that anymore. Before the meeting, you have to go to Department of State. And again, the third-party vendor can help you to upload your handwritten signature and your electronic seal, which you will get when you apply for electronic notary. So again, it's like applying to anything online now. Everything is done in templates that are going to appear on the screen of your computer. Okay. Um, and then you will also get a digital certificate that the signature you have is yours. That will be uploaded. All right. And this is per regulation 182.10. And I cited that before, 19 NYC, 19 NYCRR Part 182. All right. You must also, under this regulation, provide an exemplar. So I remember one of my attorneys, actually Jason Ganford, the co-chair of the New York Ninth Liberal Property, called me and said, let's put this into our materials. You have to provide an exemplar of your notary electronic signature as provided by Department of State registration system and the picture of your seal. So what I just described that you have to do and upload is the exemplar of your notary. And that is done through Department of State. Again, third-party vendor can help you with that. Okay. So say we get through all of this, right? By this time, we get through all of this stuff and we're ready to go finally, right? Finally, Kristin, we're ready to go. All right. Um, we will get I guess we'll get an email perhaps from let's make it up, a KW a third party vendor for Margaret, Ling, and Kristin to meet on August 14th at 3 o'clock to do a notary. All right. He will note to me that Kristin is in London now. She's been busy in Europe. She's in London now. Margaret is still sitting in Flushing, New York. Okay. And that we're ready. We did our credential analysis. She didn't answer the questions right the first time. We had to go another 24 hours. She's been traveling. It's hard for her to remember all this. Okay. All right. And then we're ready to go. All right. He's going to record this entire session and hold it for 10 years. Jason and I do a lot of cyber security sealies, and we always bring up, we hate to, but the Suffolk County breach of holding all those records in a cloud. So if you're holding it, like Kristin made a very good mark, if they're holding it for 10 years, even as a traditional notary, you're holding your records, you want to make sure your third-party vendor has unbelievably very strong software and protections and cyber issues to protect everything, all the information that's going in. Okay. All right. So basically, we go back and forth. We're signing again on the computer. All right. And then when it's done, Kristin mentioned papered out. All right. So papering out is issuing a certificate of authenticity. That's under Executive Law 135C. Okay. That records, in other words, it says the electronic document electronic notarization that we did is authentic. All right. It's called papering out. All right. That we perform the electronic notary. Remember on the acknowledgement, Kristin, you're going to do a different acknowledgement now, right? Because I'm
Right.
not physically in front of you. So what exactly would you say?
It has to contain the statement, this remote notarial act involved the use of electronic communication technology.
Exactly. Now, Kristin, It's not in the boony docks. I've been up to her beautiful office up in New City, Rockland County area. But wait, say we go northern, I don't know how far. I don't like to badmouth Buffalo. So let's go someplace, I don't know, Herkimer County, something. And this happened when this came out, when the New York State Bar Task Force, people were already complaining to the Bar Association that they were going to have problems because the county clerk may not take papering out. They just don't want to deal with it. They want original wet stamp traditional notary. So what I say is you got to check all the attorneys, check with your title company, call Kristin at Assured, call the underwriter to make sure you go directly to the county, the recording departments, or I sometimes make the calls, go to the county clerk's office to make sure they'll take your documents. You know, you don't want to deed, mortgage, all these delicate documents on a real estate transaction, you know, falling under because they will not take papering out. We have no control over that. They can say they don't want to take it, and that's the end of it. So again, check to make sure. I know as time goes on and everyone's used to using this practice, but again, it's something new. And you could even hear me right now that I have not even applied for it. I feel it's a little too cumbersome. As we practice it more and as we're more accustomed to it, we'll be in a better place. So make sure check with your title company. It seems very basic what I'm saying, to make sure they will take the document. Okay. And again, see, we're learning new things. I'm sure sooner or later the forms will have these new acknowledgements on it, because I don't believe they do now, and probably everyone's crossing out and initialing. And you know, we went through that when we had new power of attorney and had a different acknowledgement. So gonna have to give it time. All right. So basically that certificate of authenticity is stating that the printed page is a true, whatever you papered out, you printed it out. It's stating that the printed page is a true and current copy of the signatures affixed to the electronic record. It's all the same, right? It's authentic. Notarial oath for affidavits under section 182.3. So I did not know, Kristin, we have to, if I'm notarizing an affidavit, I have to administer an oath. And again, we've never done that before. So what are you doing when you administer an oath?
This is where you're
So
asking
you
if
so so you
they swear and
basically,
affirm
yeah,
that the document is
that the affidavit is true and correct. How many times have you gone to a
correct.
closing and those affidavits are flying and we're stamping them? I don't think anybody actually, well, we have to now, okay? And if you get a difficult individual, and it could be an attorney who doesn't sign affidavits, right? We only sign affirmations. All right. Then you change it around and you say, do you solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the statements made by you are true and correct? And hopefully they won't give you a hard time. Okay. This is part of the new practices that, again, I admit as a notary, I never did that. You go to closings, documents are being pushed in front of you back and forth, and we're stamping up a storm. Okay. So now there's all of this has all been solidified in the regulations. This is all practice. And as I said to you, you don't want to do any, as an attorney, you don't want to do anything wrong on your notary license and have a backlog up to, up to your law license. And everybody was worried about how much is this? Can we make a lot of money charging? Well, traditional is what, $2? I never
$2.
charge. I just kind of did it. All right. How much is electronic, Kristin?
Um,
$25, right?
20, yeah,
And you can't make a lot of
$25.
money, papering out. It's papering out is $2 for each
$2.
certificate. Because I know everybody was kind of getting all excited. Oh, this could be, and you will see, I've been gotten calls from colleagues. There's this Ron on the run. I'm not making this up.
Mhm.
There's this little minivan guy running around the 5 boroughs. So because he's aware of the fact that the lawyers like myself don't want to get involved. And I guess and I did meet someone at an event who gave me the card. And the scary part about them is they were a notary and they were doing RIN, I guess, and they didn't even know that Ron had come into effect. So I invited them to my CLE. So we really have to keep, and that's part of what Kristin and I do when we do these CLEs, is to give you all this new information, so much that we have to contain as attorneys, let alone being up to date with everything. So again, I mentioned the New York State Bar Task Force, that it was incredible. The amount of, I had to leave it within a couple of days because I haven't done an appellate brief in a very long time. And I was busy in the office. They did an amazing job going pros and cons. I have the materials. It was published in the Law Journal. If you want to see all of the documentation that went up to the governor and the Department of State of why we shouldn't have this. They said it was burdensome. That's true. They said that attorneys, although look at what happened at Ellen Tabak, the Ellen Tabak, attorneys should be exempted from any of these requirements for, like identification. We should be able to be at a higher level to be held to that standard. But then again, the higher we are, the bigger we fall. Kristin, you would agree that if something
Mhm.
goes wrong, again, our law license is at stake. And fraud. Margaret's always talking about fraud. Jason Gamper's not here with me today with Jason Bergman. When we did our hypothetical, we were talking about fraud. So we're looking at one another in a window with a third-party vendor, and I'm only looking at Kristin from like here up. How do I know there isn't someone coercing her in the background to sign away? All right, we don't know, although I know Kristin, and she doesn't,
Right.
she's looking like she's she's comfortable, she's not nervous. But again, the fraud issue was a great concern for the New York State Bar. And again, the argument, which I thought was kind of funny, because I'm like that. I always believe in being equitable to everybody. Yes, I have ESQ after my name, but doesn't make me holier than thou. But yes, they put it in there that the standard of that where attorneys shouldn't have to be like treated like regular notaries. And I'm sure that made regular notaries very upset, okay? Because now they just wanted us exempted from all of these rules. So it's interesting, it went up in, I guess, February, March. Um, no response to it. It went to the Secretary of State and the governor. I'm very doubtful that's going to proceed to change the way that we're doing things now. So I then proceeded to go ahead and do all these CLEs because we need to learn how to do this, regardless of whatever the outcome of the task force is. Not that it's, maybe if we're lucky, they'll recognize it. I don't know, but we still are getting asked. I know, Kristin, how many times have people asked for you to do it? Has it been a lot since
Yeah,
February?
I've been
Yeah.
asked quite a number of times to do Ron. And then I think also I've heard the argument from a couple of attorney colleagues too that, well, this argument has been made to the governor and the Secretary of State, so we should be acting as if it doesn't apply to us, and that absolutely is a complete misconception.
Oh
We
no.
we as attorneys still need to abide by this.
Oh my, yes, no, I mean, you don't want to hold up a transaction. So I want to say that since February, when we started all of these CLEs, and now we're in August, all right, people have been using third-party vendors. So feel free to reach out to both of us. I have been reaching out to colleagues just to try to start establishing this through the experience. If there's someone that knows a good person, and of course ask the key questions. If you're a notary, you could ask the key questions to see whether they have a concept of all the things I just talked about. And that should be the red flag if they don't. All right. I wanted to also recognize, I know I was talking and I did. It's Elon. Elon is very kind to share his template on his Excel spreadsheet. And you could email him at eweinreb, EWEINREB, okay, at weinreb winereblaw.com. Somebody just sent a new message. Let's see, what is their new message? Can I open it? One new message. No, I can't open it. All right. Yeah, let me just see. Should I press this? I'm afraid to press it and I'll be gone. One new message. All right. Oh, that's the code. Aneska just gave you the code. Okay. And again, as I said, can't stress anything more. So yeah, people will be asked, they get all excited about this. And I don't want to be, the person that throws a dent into the whole thing. But I read this over in the beginning. I must have read the materials. The Land Title Association gave a big CLE. Everybody did. And I just kept reading everything over and over. I have a really good grasp of it now, but I really can't see myself, and I think Kristin agreed, implementing this unless I had faith and trust in the third-party vendor, I think. Because you're just worried that you and I, Kristin, know what we're doing, and then the third-party vendor comes and awkwardly something doesn't go right. You don't want documents challenged because of fault in notary after. We don't want that happening. But the
Mhm.
fraud issue is key. We're lawyers, we're really worried about that. I don't know how we could try to cover ourselves. And then one more thing, Jason's not here, and I didn't bring it. Jason, at one of our events, I don't have the citation. There was legislation coming down that if this thing blows up, and I'm just paraphrasing it, the fault of it goes on the notary. If there's
Mhm.
fraud, if there's something, it goes to the notary. So there is a question, the frequently asked questions, whether we should be getting E&O insurance. And as attorneys, we have E&O insurance. But does that mean notaries now? Because notaries, think about it, they go out and they stamp. No one's holding them responsible. Although when I do fraud, real estate fraud in my underwriting life, okay, we will bring them in on actions for deed fraud that you should have known. You didn't ask for proper identification, right? You didn't question the capacity of that person to sign the documents. We will bring them into the action. Okay, so those are very severe cases. But again, they did say that the ultimate liability will fall on the notary. And what our response to that is, it's bad enough when you're in person, but you're electronically. There's a lot of things that we don't know. All right,
Mhm.
and that's kind of difficult to hold us to a higher standard. Kristin, we ran through, I'm going to say to everyone here, and I see some of my dear friends and colleagues, we ran through a lot of materials. Kristin, give everybody your email address in case anyone wants to contact you.
Oh, sure. It's just my name, Kristin, Kristin at assureabstract.com. I'll put it in the chat also.
And, I'm sure I've been waiting, and it's already been, wow, it's been 6 months to do a follow-up on this. So as more things become available, I actually would like to, but the problem is every time I call a Ron third-party vendor, they just want to market the things I've sat through. They just want to market what they do. If it gets to the point where I can find the right one, we can really really do a really good, act out situation on a Zoom CLE, and then they
Mhm.
could talk about what their perspective is. I think that would be an interesting event, but I haven't found the right fit yet. When I find the right Ron vendor, okay, and they're not just marketing, because that's all they're doing is marketing. When you start asking them the
Mhm.
substance of the regulations, they're not really hearing me, but that's because I'm a lawyer, I guess, right? You and I agree to that. Um,
Right.
any other things
Yeah.
you want to talk about, Kristin? We have a little
No,
time.
I mean, I'll just reiterate, like you said, because the onus will fall on us as notaries, it's important to vet out the third party vendors, and just make sure that they are qualified to be able to maintain that information. And in New York State, it's not required that we have E&O as notaries,
Right?
but it is a best practice to have that if you're just a notary, not an attorney notary. We have our own E&O that can cover us for notarial acts. But for anyone that's watching that is just a notary, that is a good best practice.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to put in, thank you so much. We're at time. Thank you for joining us today. Look out for future events I do. If you have any questions, contact me. Kristin has been with us, an amazing AmTrust agent. I think you're going on 2 years now.
2 years.
She is a proud graduate of PACE, very involved in zoning and landmarks. She knows that really well. Please feel free to reach out to her. All right. I always tell that to people. It doesn't have to be a notary question. And then, we collaborate on many different questions and whatever. Her company is up in Rockland County, and that is a growing part of town, extremely growing since COVID, Hudson Valley, all those areas. A lot of commercial investment going up there. A lot of people that kind of escape Manhattan, I will say politely. So please contact her or contact me. And we're already talking about our next event, which might be live at her beautiful office up in Rockland. So if anybody that's on this, it might be Charles. He might come in from Yonkers. But I always make sure I market this. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Aniska, for all of your help. We hope you learned something. And if you have any questions you want to contact me or Kristin, please feel free to do so. But otherwise than that, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much now. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.